Welcome to the June 8th Public Planning Committee meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask if we are in compliance with FOIA.
We are.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda as submitted? Is there a second? All those in favor, raise your right hand. Thank you very much. Approval of the minutes, May 11th, 2023.
Move adoption is written.
Okay, second. All those in favor?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I do have a correction, yes, sir, on page 4, and I'll give a copy of my scribble to the clerks. Right before the paragraph number 8, adjournment, the paragraph talks about consensus of the committee, staff prioritize the following amendments, and the language says floor area ratio and parking. And I listened to the video recalling that we were focused on mass, scale, density, height, and floor area ratio. So I would like to add the phrase mass, scale, density, height, and in front of the word floor area ratio.
Accepted.
Accepted. All those in favor of the motion? Thank you very much. We have appearance by citizens today. Kim, I believe, who is the first?
Yes. Zhao Dan Lee.
Planning Committee. My name is Xiaodan Li. Becker is my counsel lady. Weissman once said, the most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Over the years, the town government made multiple attempts to address housing affordability without much success. In addition to the most moral hazard that incentivize low-wage earners to depend on government subsidies, restrictions, and other complex compliance paperwork, disincentivize private developers to participate in government-sponsored programs. We have to recognize that housing affordability and worker shortage in Hilton Head Island are structural issues. More than 70% of the island are within PUD that has low-density covenants. And the island has been a draw for decades for retirees. The 65-plus age group constitutes almost 40% of the population here on the island, more than double the state average of 18%. The unbalanced ratio of work-age population to retirement age population is the key reason that the island has to rely on adjacent municipalities for supply of workforce. A study commissioned by the town government in 2017 estimates that more than 14,000 workers commuted to Hilton Head Island every day. More than 60% of the workforce came from Jasper County or Bluffton, Savannah areas where land is cheaper and where they prefer to live. Over the past decade, the population in Bluffton exploded, offering plenty of job opportunities to keep some of those workers closer to home. When Jasper Ocean Terminal is completed, Hilton Head Island will also be competing for workers with Jasper. In addition, as more people live and vacation in Hilton Island, traffic getting on and off the island has become a nightmare, resulting even less workers who are willing to suffer a 2-hour commute to trade a house with a backyard for a 400 square foot subsidized studio. Therefore, the most rational, urgent matter is to address a workforce shortage, is to solve the traffic congestion. In this case, let the market do its work, even though it does not always operate in the politician's timeline. Solving workforce issue, it's better to have common sense than compassion in this case. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian Allman.
Brian Allman at 6 Shell Rim Road in Sea Pines. Here to support the project for ordinance 2023-7. I've been vacationing here at Hilton Head since 2001. 2015. Prior to moving to Hilton Head, we lived in South Charleston, West Virginia, where I was president of the South Charleston Chamber. the Area Development Corporation, and I was on the Planning and Zoning Commission. As we all know, the service and hospitality industry is the engine that drives the economy here in Hilton Head. What do all engines need? They need fuel. What is the fuel that drives our economic engine? It is employees and people. This project will go a long way solving our employee shortage and the problem that we have here on Hilton Head. Also, it is my understanding that private dollars are being used with no public subsidies to rejuvenate some blemished properties here on Hilton Head. Once again, I support this project. Thank you.
Hey, Brian.
Matt Sweeney.
Morning. Thank you, Public Planning Committee, for the opportunity to speak. My name is Matt Sweeney, and I live in Indigo Run. Today's discussion about the Islander mixed-use project is really important, not just because it considers minor amendments to the LMO, but because the project is a model for private market-based solutions for workers who wish to live on the island and the employers who value their work. Government programs generally don't go away. So projected over a decade, recurring costs of the new housing fund, a director to lead it, and staff to manage it will cost about $40 million. The benefits will be concentrated in a relatively small group of people, while the consequences will be imposed on a great number of taxpayers in amounts the government hopes will be small enough that they won't be noticed. We have heard well-intentioned policymakers and nonprofits express their notions of improved products and services in the future as a result of government-subsidized housing. But how can they know? Will the winners of the affordable housing lottery be the most productive workers? Will ineligible tenants ever really be evicted? Will eligible tenants be employed by companies that might otherwise fail without workers who are subsidized? And then there's the moral dilemma of fairness. As of 2021, there were already more than 7,000 households living with 30 to 120% of AMI on the island. How is it fair for the government to pick winners to be their neighbors? There have been no discussions of harmful consequences or the opportunity costs of our workforce housing framework, but I believe there are many. The town council should disclose them. As a private free market solution, the Islander mixed-use project eliminates the need for taxpayer dollars and therefore the unintended consequences of taxpayer subsidies. This developer has full visibility to profit and loss generated in a free market process, or at least is willing to shoulder the risk for all of it, and will meet the expressed needs for workforce housing. Finally, as is usually the case in free markets, the Islander mixed-use project is about a year ahead of the government's schedule. Your district plans, for example, won't be adopted until the first quarter of next year. But why let that constrain this private project? Why not let it show you an efficient market solution? It's far better than another self-storage facility. Please make a positive recommendation for this project to showcase a creative market solution, save taxpayer dollars, and revitalize a dilapidated but valuable location on our island.
Thank you, Matt.
Don Sigmund.
Morning, Don.
Don Segman. I was recruited in 1985 to come to Hilton Head Island to work for Charles Fraser, VP of Finance. I was involved with him with a lot of developments, different things, different projects. One thing he pointed out in '85 was the need of workforce housing and affordability and location of it close to where people were working. I've been on the island for 38 years. I've lived in Sea Pines for over 30 years. I come in and out of Sea Pines all the time. I cut through there all the time. It's an ugly site. It's been an ugly site since I first moved here. What this developer is trying to do will clean up a very dilapidated, ugly area. It'll provide the housing that we need for employees and workforce housing. It can provide housing for the students at USCB across the street. The location is ideal to cut down on traffic. I'm coming in and out of Greenwood Drive all the time. It's a nightmare. What he's doing with the location will greatly enhance walking and bicycle ability for the workforce. They can walk or bike to almost every job in that area, all the way from Caligny Beach, into Sea Pines, Harbor Town, et cetera. I'm looking at it from a reduced traffic standpoint because this workforce housing location is superior to all. It is the best. It's the same areas that Charles Fraser was talking about back in the 80s. He's a genius. He had great foresight, and I think he would support this with 100%. I support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
Dr. Alpanu.
Morning.
Thank you. First of all, let me just take this opportunity to thank you for the long-standing support and commitment to the university that the town has shown. Without your support, we wouldn't be here. And so I am absolutely grateful for that. I do want to take a moment to speak on behalf of this project from the perspective particularly of USCB. And we as an institution are committed to the vision that was shared with the town of really growing a robust educational institution here, providing a full range of educational opportunities from our our Osho Lifelong Learning Institute to hospitality management and to possibly other programs as we move forward. And it is a particularly well understood challenge for our continued growth that housing for students is absolutely critical. And we have track record from all our other campuses that housing is a major contributor and driver for growth and continued growth. And it's particularly going to be so here because of the added challenge of the transportation and the fact that some of our students have to start with housing in Bluffton, and then when they're transitioning to junior and senior year, then they don't have housing here. We also believe that housing is so critical because the growth of that student population here would help to contribute not only to the vitality and vibrancy that we want here, but also to the workforce challenges that we're facing, particularly in the hospitality industry. Of the different plans that we have had to contemplate over the years, the plan that you're looking at is the most feasible for our institution at this point. It is also potentially the most timely for us in helping us continue to drive the growth that we are striving for. So I do want to speak on behalf of our institution and its continued growth and in appealing to your support for this plan. So thank you so much. And again, thank you for your incredible support for you.
Thank you, Dr. Cano.
Thank you.
Mike Wagner.
Morning, Mike.
Morning. I'm Mike Wagner from Shore Beach Service. Every year, Shore Beach Service has a need for housing around 60 beach lifeguards. To accommodate this over the years, we own units up at Hilton Head Resort. We've also gone and rented units for years, 10, 12 units. With the increase in short-term rentals, those have been harder and harder to find. And we've, right now we're struggling to find housing. We found it this year, but paying extreme prices in many cases, essentially paying a short-term rental fee for 4 months at a time. Our primary need is May through August. So we've looked into purchasing more, building more units in the past, but for us, we don't want to get into the rental market in the off season. We'd like to stick with the job that we do. So we just don't have a need for them for September through April for the most part. We feel that Mr. Despain's plan would suit us perfectly because we've talked about taking a portion of the USCB dorms, working out an arrangement with them to rent them from USCB so that we could use them for the precise time that we really need them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lynn Fontaine.
Good morning. I'm in HHP. I'm in Patsy Bryson's district. Based on the staff assessment, this Office Way Islander mixed-use project enjoys many advantages. Long-term lease contracts with employers, which leaves the responsibility of determining eligibility and affordability to the private sector instead of the government. Converts vacant and dilapidated office buildings into Islander housing and limited commercial usage. Moderate density on the site coverage ratios is not going to be another Aquaterra. It revitalizes USCB hospitality program by offering student housing. Currently, there is none, and internship opportunities in the service industry. The Hilton Head town government has invested more than $20 million to the university, but currently enrollment is only about 10% of capacity. More importantly, the investors will take the risks without the taxpayers' dollars. We hope the Planning Committee will vote favorably to encourage private participation. Thank you.
Jay Wendell.
Council members, my name is Jay Wendell. I live at 18 Manor Court Lane in Hilton Head Island Plantation. I'm also general manager of the beach house here at Caligny Circle. In 2015, I actually chaired the Chamber of Commerce, and then Mayor David Bennett asked me to meet, and he asked what the top priority or the biggest issue was for our community businesses, and I told him at that point it was housing. That was in 2015. My wife has an associate that works and lives in Bluffton, and she's going to be leaving her job, moving back to North Carolina because she can't afford the rate increase in Bluffton. This is somebody that makes a great deal of money, but what was once $1,500 has moved to $2,500 on a two-bedroom apartment. 2015 to today, our issue is expanding beyond Hilton Head Island. It's going out into Bluffton, pushing our workforce even further away. That's a big issue, and it hasn't changed. You know, just in the last week, we've added, and by the way, I was at the bank yesterday. It was a great venue, thought it was fantastic. We added yet another 100+ jobs inside the circle in the last 2 weeks. Now, when I think of this spot, in this location, and the opportunity to bring workforce inside that circle and not have to travel beyond, I think of the amazing abilities that you have in your decision up there. This is an opportunity that is beneficial to our community. It's beneficial to our workers. Our commitment is that we can fill these. We've signed a letter of intent on a building that doesn't exist. Can't do much more than that until you agree that we are going to move forward with this opportunity. So I would very much ask for your consideration. I'm sure decisions have been made in your minds, but rethink them as you sit there at the dais and think about what's right for the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe.
Katie Henderson. Katie Henderson.
Good morning. My name is Katie Henderson, and I live in the Hilton Head Plantation. I just came this morning to talk just a few comments about workforce housing. According to the 2017 Beaufort County Housing Needs Assessment, to satisfy the demands for affordable workforce housing over the next decade, Hilton Head Island needs to add approximately 5,709 housing units with rents below $875 or resale prices below $200,000. For reference, the median price of a detached single-family home right now here on the island is $980,000. That's not even a thing. Okay. Hilton Head Island was built upon Charles Frazier's vision of an eco-friendly resort town with world-class facilities. Many transplants are willing to pay a premium to live in low-density communities. Over the years, the town government kept that vision alive by aggressively purchasing land for preservation purposes. Of the 2,028 plus acres owned by the town, only 125 acres can be used for development. In addition, nearly 3/4 of the island is occupied by planned unit developments, PUDs, and over 70% of all land on the island is located within a PUD. Most of the PUDs were established before the town was incorporated and received their development approvals through Beaufort County. These PUDs are master plan communities with predetermined densities and lot configurations. Simply put, there is not enough available land to satisfy increased demand for affordable housing without changing the land management ordinance and sacrificing the natural landscape as well as the lifestyle of the communities. Last year, voters approved a 1% sales tax to buy green space and reduce housing density. The residents have spoken, and we hope that you will listen.
Riley Peters.
Good morning. Thank you to the planning committee very much for the time this morning. My name is Raleigh Peters. My wife Laura and I live at 1 Gray Widgeon Road in Sea Pines. And just like everybody here, we love Hilton Head Island very, very much. And when we think about all the families that come here for really what is the best week of their year for vacation, we love to see that dynamism. And we know that that economic activity that comes here provides all of us with great benefits. And we love to see families having a great time here. But as we all know, and as I think has been well laid out by many of our fellow citizens already this morning, this does bring problems with congestion and rising costs onto the island. And unfortunately, I think it hits all of the wonderful women and men who work on our behalf and on behalf of all of these vacationers in food and beverage, in retail, in the hotel industry, in the trades, construction, the lifeguards, and many others, harder even than it does us. I lived and worked in New York City for 10 years, so I know a lot about commuting. And I think a lot of these people would probably tell you that their commute might even be more stressful than their actual job once they get here and do their job. And so I view this project as something that can really alleviate a lot of that stress, congestion, traffic, and environmental impact in a very positive way. And there are 3 things in particular I really like about this project and would like to lend my very strong support for. Number one, the location. As has already been stated, the location is absolutely ideal for so many of these good men and women to live in and work out of on the south end of the island, supporting Lakeview, the Sea Pines Circle area, Sea Pines Resorts, and all of the south end. Just an absolutely ideal location. Number 2, the partnership with USCB, and I was so happy that the doctor is here today to speak a little bit about that. Because as I understand it, there's not only the student housing component, there's also going to be a shared parking component. And I drive back and forth on Office Parkway multiple times every week. My wife and I do. We come out of the Ocean Gate, we shop at Harris Teeter, and I'm always seeing that very beautiful campus, absolutely beautiful over there. But the parking lot is largely empty. So I just think this is smart. It's just a smart use of open space. So I love that piece of it. Third and finally, the funding component. I believe this is a fully private endeavor. I think that's been confirmed this morning. The risk will be borne by businesses and private individuals, not taxpayers. And I really appreciate that. We taxpayers are asked to fund and support federal, state, local projects all the time, and rightly so. But in this case, put the risk on the private investment group, and I'm fully in support of that. Thank you very much.
Mike Tunner.
Morning.
Morning.
My name is Mike Tunner. I live in Palmetto Hall. I reviewed your 2024 budget. Town government set aside $3.3 million for the housing fund. I object to the town's entanglement in affordable housing, and I'm in favor of private sector solutions for a very simple reason. We don't need a middleman. Take the Kawagichi Historic Neighborhoods Community Development Corporation Fund as an example. We forecasted a total of $5.3 million in grants from the state and county, but only $3.5 million, or 65%, goes to the beneficiaries. Regarding the housing fund, the workforce housing project manager position will cost taxpayers almost $200,000 every year for salary and benefits. Additional staff will almost certainly be required for implementation and complex compliance paperwork. How much does the office pay Islander mixed use project cost taxpayers? Zero. Who monitors the eligibility of residents there? Their employers, who have the best understanding of their employees' inputs. Mr. Mark Orlando provided the perfect model for employers to attract and retain workers. In the job posting for the housing project manager position, it offers a salary of up to $128,000 with a comprehensive benefit package with all the whistles. You know, it's amazing you get what you pay for. Please support the Office Way Islander Mixed Use Project. They don't need government funding, they just need less red tape. Thank you.
Our final comment, Jim Levesque.
Morning. A lot of data is shared with you by the previous speakers. I'm going to go a little bit different on this. Okay. A number of years ago, there was a great deal of excitement having our own college campus on the island. We built a building. The town put in $20 million. It's a 10% occupancy. What did you miss? We not do diligence, analyze what's going to happen, or did we get carried away by some emotion? Again, several years ago, I attended a presentation by the consultant that was down here from Boston. We had very poor attendance at Indigo Run for her presentation, but I thought she was coming from La La Land when she talked about how many housing units we need to add per year. When I extended that out, if we followed that for a few years, and if you figured 1.5 people per unit, you would be adding upwards of 12,000 people to the population in a relatively short period of time. Look at the challenge on services. You know, from the fire department to the schools to everything. And then to look at the density housing. My goodness, we already have a lot of density housing. That doesn't solve any problems except allow the developers to make more money to put more houses and lots of land. So when you look at that presentation, you really wonder, how would we manage that here? I look at the businesses having a responsibility. You know, the chamber and the businesses working together. This is an economic issue. This is a business issue. It's not a town issue. I don't view the town doing real estate development as a core business the town should be involved in. Most important to me is I'm not sure we're targeted as to what we're trying to accomplish.
I look at it, we're gonna try and scratch an itch, but we don't know how big the itch is. And the itch might be coming from another place of people coming in. So much due diligence has to be done on this before we make any decisions in charge of him. Because every phase of our lives here are impacted by decisions that are being made in this expansion. So I challenge you, don't be carried away by any emotion and say, we'll be the first, and we'll solve this. It's going to take a lot of effort on your part and the town council's part to do this. And I really challenge you to do that. Thanks a lot. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Kim. I appreciate that. Our first item on unfinished business is a presentation and discussion on the creation of the Hilton Head Island District Plan and Land Management Ordinance Update. Sean Cullen. Sean is Assistant Town Manager, Community Development.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. I'm going to call Missy up here in just a minute. She's going to do the presentation on these two items, but I want to share a couple of key bits of information. We have made a lot of progress here since our last meeting. This committee supported the RFQ for the resilience plan. That will go out tomorrow on the street. I briefed council the other night about the William Berkeley Gateway Corridor project. That RFQ will also go out tomorrow. So those are moving forward. I want to talk a little bit about planning efforts. This committee also asked us to accelerate LMOSET 4A. I reviewed the final draft yesterday. We'll have legal review and I anticipate that we'll advertise that by next week. Right? So that's the time frame there. It's a 30-day public notice requirement for planning commission. So we'll have that planning commission meeting mid-July and move that forward. And then we're working on the balance of phase 4 to bring that forward later this summer for advertisement. I also do want to say that we're bringing on a consultant and we'll have an RFQ go out next week to bring in a code writer to do the phase 5, the big overhaul. And so we're making good progress on that, and we'll keep on our timeline as it relates to those efforts. That district plan, growth framework and district plan, we provided a growth framework map, a draft map, and we worked to refine that. Also the districts that we plan to assess. And I'm happy to announce that we've added 3 new professional planners to our staff since the last meeting. A couple have started. One starts June 20th, so we're increasing our internal capability to deliver your strategic action plan items and things that are important to us. And we've also increased the capabilities of our consulting team to add some more firepower to move these things forward at a much quicker pace. And so Missy's going to cover, but I'm going to say it first, that the Marshes District, which includes Marston, Bow, Jonesville, Spanish Wells, is a priority district, and we plan to bring you a draft back in July. And then what we're calling the Bridge to the Beach, which is really from the Cross Island where it lands on Palmetto Bay Road all the way down through Cordillo to include the Sea Pines Circle area. Bring you that district in August. I'm going to push hard to make sure that our team internally and our team with our partners delivers that to you as quickly as we can on that timeline. So if Missy would like to come up and do share her thoughts from a presentation on the growth framework and district beyond what I've shared, I'd like her to do so at this point. Thank you.
Sean. Hey, Missy. Morning.
Not a whole lot more that I wanted to share other than really the identified timeline that we had in the memo was that we anticipate bringing the draft Marshes District back to PPC in July and the Bridge to Beach draft district planning document to you for review in August. So really we're looking at that we would have initial findings and recommendations for those 2 districts and that the first kind of stakeholder review would be by this body.
Questions? Glenn?
One quick question. I think I understood Mr. Collins to say that Bridge to Beach is down to Cordillo, Sea Pines to Cordillo, Palmetto Bay, Sea Pine Circle, Cordillo, but I understand it goes all the way down to Coligny Circle. Is that correct? or does it stop at Cordeo?
Whitney Circle is in the Forest Beach District.
Okay, so that's going to be a separate district plan from, so it's not really, it's bridged almost to the beach. Okay. I'm sorry, I thought it went all the way down to Cordeo. I didn't realize that was a separate district plan. Okay.
I'd like to follow up on that. What's the interaction? How do you, if we're making commitments, conceptual commitments to bridge to the beach as it's described, Cordillo, and later on is going to be the Forest Beach area, how are those two meshing in a timeline?
We haven't really established which districts come in the sequential order after these two. So these two are prioritized first. Certainly there will be, as it's a master plan overall, that we would have overall planning for all districts and make sure that there's interaction and blending between the recommendations.
I might suggest that in the bridge to the beach, there's a dotted line that goes all the way to the beach so that we're at least understanding impacts at that time.
Absolutely, that's a great comment. We see it as Bridge to the Beach District, and Forest Beach District is because there's some commonality with the oceanfront in the center, and then the residential and resort district that happens there. There is a little difference between where the transition from Cordillo to the Coligny side. It's a little different than the rest of the corridor, but we'll certainly make the connection and link to the beach district and how it connects there. So we'll make that.
The two districts, Marshes and Bridge to the Beach, are very, very different. One might have ecological and environmental priorities that need to be looked at. Bridge to the Beach has things like density, transportation impacts, activities, so on. And so how did those things get integrated into the consultants' proposals? Are there adjacent studies being done on transportation, on other things, land use and so on?
Well, they look at all the systems that impact the entire island and then specific recommendations related to those segments that are within those districts. And we purposefully selected the Marshes district because it's a sensitive, more of a conservation style district, and then the Bridge to the Beach district because of it's more eclectic, right? It has centers, it has major corridors, it has a different mix of users, and so the goal is to use those two districts as the model for the remaining five, because most of the remaining five will have some characteristics that either are tied to one or the other. And so we'll have the benefit of that information to help guide the speed and pace that we can complete the balance of the districts that remain.
The Bridge to the Beach also ties into our beach management plan and other things that deal with capacity. And part of my constituencies are in Shipyard, Forest Beach area, and I'm already getting calls over time about congestion, access, and so on. So I'm very conscious of the traffic implications of a proposal. So.
And if I may, Chair, just follow up on that, because the one thing that I wasn't hearing in all of this discussion was a concentration on focusing on the impacts to our residents. So not only those within District Ward 3, but across the island who utilize that area. So that has to be a priority in all of those considerations as moving forward, looking at the district plans.
One more follow-up. I think we've seen before some maps, I think, of the districts, but because in my head I was conflating, I guess, two of them. I think it'd be helpful, Mr. Chair, for the staff to send us those district maps again. And I know now some of them have been named so that we can connect those dots, because now, obviously I was confused. And so I think it'd be helpful to see the maps again and so that we understand where these districts are. And for the public as well, I think it'd be helpful to, I don't know where they might be on our website, but I think it might be helpful to call that out again with regard to district planning as one of our major initiatives.
Thank you.
We'll make sure you have them, and also because this will be a monthly update to this committee, throughout the duration. We'll make sure we have a visual to put up at every one of your committee meetings.
Okay, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Sean and Missy, I'm very pleased with the way the district planning seems to be organized, and I look forward to seeing that and how we're able to manage better the growth of the community. I want to go back to what we brought up one meeting ago, maybe 2 meetings ago, about the fourth leg of the provision of the LMO. We raised in this committee concerns about floor area ratio, FAR, massing of buildings, and some other subjects. Am I to understand that those are being accelerated, so we'll be hearing about suggested ways to apply those in our August meeting? July meeting, rather?
We plan to advertise the floor area ratio parking calibration next week for planning commission, public hearing in mid-July. So following that, it would probably be PPC in August, depending on the timing. Yes, sir.
Okay, so it would go to the planning commission in July.
Yeah, we're required to take those amendments through the
These,
planning.
these are important matters to us. And I appreciate you working with us and accelerating the schedule. So we'll look forward to that result.
We'll send out the updated schedule to the committee and town council so that they're aware through the town manager of what we're bringing forward and what pace.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Missy. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could second Mr. Stanford's thank you for accelerating phase 4A.
Okay, the next item is a consideration of proposed ordinance 2023-07, amending sections Title 16 of the Municipal Code. It's the Islander Mixed Use Text Amendment. On? Getting your 10,000 steps.
Good to see you again. And it's going to be a common theme. So Missy is going to do the presentation. But I want to make a few comments because I've been involved in discussion on this text amendment for a couple of years. And the goal of considering public policy is to determine whether or not it works from a public standpoint. And I hope the outcome of this meeting is, if nothing else, a list of things that could be addressed to make the public policy concerns go away. Missy has a 15-page staff report that was included in the packet, probably the most thorough staff report I've seen in my time here. And I know that the LMO committee, the planning commission, and even this body has weighed in with suggestions and considerations. And I believe we've made some progress toward a better public policy consideration in the LMO text amendment. And if there are any concerns here or at council, I would like to know what they are so that if there's an opportunity to address those with the applicant, I think that to me would be the ultimate goal. So I want to make those comments, and Missy and the applicant can provide the information.
Good. Missy?
Here again to talk about. Again, this request is from an applicant. It is a request by Josh Tiller of J.K. Tiller Associates for a text amendment. So a policy change to the land management ordinance. It's a change proposed to 4 sections. The developer does have a possible development in mind should this policy be adopted. This presentation really focuses on the policy analysis of the particular request and not necessarily on the development itself. So before you today is a recommendation that you consider the proposed ordinance change and that you make a recommendation. So this, as it was stated before, there has been a range of public process for this amendment. It did go to the LMO committee back in September and November. The Planning Commission held its public hearing in December of 2022 and went to the Public Planning Committee in January. The amendment has changed quite a bit since you saw it last. Those changes are identified on the screen and were identified in the memo. There are 9 changes that were made and adjusted by the applicant through some conversations between staff and the applicant team to address some of the concerns that were raised along the way. There has been a change to the definition of the use. It removes the group living dormitory component that used to be in the definition. They added a condition on shared parking such that it has to provide student housing. They added the workforce housing component, a floor area ratio, a minimum average unit size, a site coverage index, a functional open space requirement, and an adjacent street setback average that exceeds what's required. And then they formerly had a request to increase the building height to 55 feet, and that is no longer included. So, so then we're going to go through the request in and of itself. So starting with the definition for Islanders mixed use is the same as the definition for mixed use. So the difference between the two is the use-specific conditions. And so this text amendment request is for this particular use in the Sea Pines Circle District only. And here's the full request summary. The request includes removal of a density cap, and it includes an undefined density that's limited by applicable design and performance standards such as height and parking. It has this Islanders mixed use, a parking requirement at 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit, and then separate parking spaces required for the non-residential at 1 per 500 gross floor area. And then there are a number of use-specific conditions that are outlined here. The coming slides go over those use-specific conditions in detail, so I won't cover them in this. So the request also included some letters of intent from Shore Beach Services, Beach House, Search Group, Brown Dog, and USCB, and many of those
Excuse me, Leslie.
heard from already.
I think it would be important to go over those specific conditions for the benefit of the public, if not for the members of the Public Planning Committee.
Sure, I can do that. So the use specific conditions that are proposed with Islanders mixed use, there are a number of them. Separate parking spaces for use by residential units are eligible to be included as part of a shared parking plan, meeting the requirements of shared parking that are exist in the code. Also, that this development may use shared parking on education use owned property if Islander mixed use development provides student housing and a shared parking agreement between the educational institution and the developer, and that the parking agreement must be in place at the time the developer applies for their development permit. The other condition is that this use must be on property within 500 feet of an education use. It shall not be a short-term rental property. 15% of Islander mixed-use units shall be workforce housing units rented to households earning up to 130% AMI for a workforce housing agreement requirement. The rental workforce housing units have to remain in the program for a minimum of 10 years from the date of the initial certificate of occupancy. Also, there's a minimum average unit size of 750 square feet per dwelling unit, which is required. And there's a calculation. The minimum average unit size is calculated by the building's total gross floor area, less the commercial use, less the non-habitable areas such as hallways, lobbies, and mechanical rooms divided by the total number of dwelling units. Also, there's a floor area ratio of 0.68 that shall not be exceeded, and a site coverage index of 50% that cannot be exceeded as well. The site coverage index is the percentage of the lot covered by the building's footprint. Also, that this use shall have a 10% requirement of functional open space or common amenity space. And also there is a use-specific condition requiring an adjacent street setback that shall meet or exceed an average of 35 feet. But the applicants also included some letters of intent. They supplied a traffic impact analysis and a building mass and scale exhibit as included in the packet. The traffic impact analysis was prepared by Kimberly Horn It was rather lengthy. I'll summarize just in case you didn't read all of that. It did recommend that there were some site access improvements, that there is one ingress and one egress lane operated under Office Way, and then on Office Park, there is another ingress and egress lane. And we also included some traffic analysis that was from the town's engineering department, and the Sea Pines Circle traffic count summary is on the slide here. Also, per the traffic impact analysis, we'd assumed a build out by 2025 and anticipated that there would be 44 new AM peak trips and 59 new PM peak trips. They anticipated that the increase in time getting through the circle then in the AM would increase by 2.9 seconds, and in the PM, 4.6 seconds. And again, that was assuming that the building was built out and occupied by 2025. This chart was supplied by USCB, you already heard from Dr. Panu, and it shows the correlation of the growth in headcount at USCB and student housing. And you can see that as they've added additional housing, their enrollment has increased. Also, we just briefly talked about what we're doing with district planning. While we haven't completed the Bridge to Beach district analysis, we have completed and town council has adopted the Mid-Island district. The Mid-Island district had some mixed-use recommendations within the center of the district in their current shopping center areas. In our draft growth framework map, the Sea Pine Circle area has been identified as a primary center, and there may be, through that planning process, recommendations for mixed use. So in general, the mixed use recommendations in the Mid-Island District Plan do account for an increase of residential density, allowing a mix of uses, as well as allowing shared structured or surface parking lots in existing centers. I will point out too that the residential density increase that was proposed for the Mid-Island District was 12 to 18 dwelling units at 1 to 3 stories. Again, we've not done the analysis yet for the Sea Pine Circle District, but just wanted to give you that as a point of reference. So again, the use definition, so I'm just going to go through just the analysis by each of the pieces. Obviously, this amendment has a lot of components to it, and there's a lot to unpack. So again, the use definition is the same as the definition for mixed use. However, mixed use not allow shared parking. So one of the use-specific conditions for mixed use not allow shared parking agreements. Obviously, Islanders mixed use has that as one of their use-specific conditions that they wanted to allow. But overall, as far as the uses that are allowed in the Sea Pine Circle District, Sea Pine Circle allows a range of uses that are permitted by right, permitted with conditions, and permitted with special exceptions. And residential services, public civic, health, commercial, office, as well as some industrial uses are allowed in this district. So in general, as mixed use is already allowed, generally speaking, Islanders mixed use is compatible with Sea Pine Circle uses.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I want to pause there for just a minute. I think that's really important because we're considering a text amendment. And looking at that range of uses allowed now in Sea Pine Circle District and the finding that staff has made that this mixed use, Islander mixed use is generally compatible, I think is important for us to remember in a text amendment. Thank you.
So shared parking, again, Sea Pine Circle District allows mixed use. And again, one of those use-specific conditions for mixed use is not to allow parking spaces for residential use to be part of a shared parking plan. Islander mixed use, of course, that's one of the main differences. is that it is eligible to be included in a shared parking plan. They also added a condition that is listed there, that they may use shared parking on education use owned property if the proposed development provides student housing and a shared parking agreement. Shared parking allowance does serve a public purpose as it is providing workforce housing and student housing. However, we did have some recommendation by staff to slightly change the wording of the condition that's proposed. Because the language, we already require an agreement. It's redundant in the fourth bullet above to also state that a shared parking agreement is required, as it's a requirement already in 16.5.107H3. So we're proposing that the language for that particular use-specific condition be bullet number 2, or the second from the bottom, under mixed-use development may utilize shared parking on education use property if the development provides student housing. So one of the other use-specific conditions is a proximity to an education use. The proposal is that it's eligible, Islander mixed use is eligible if they're within 500 feet of an education use, as well as in the Sea Pine Circle District.
Just for clarification, so that any portion of a lot that has the boundary touching it is eligible for this text amendment.
That's correct. And so there are 23 parcels within 500 feet. They're also in the Sea Pine Circle District. Also, based on some walking and biking tolerances, it is reasonable to walk or bike between 500 and 1,500 feet from a residential unit to a primary destination. Also, within the use requirements for a shared parking agreement, 500 feet is a requirement for that particular shared parking agreement. So it coincides with some of the required standards for shared parking. So there is a use-specific condition to prohibit short-term rentals. And short-term rentals are defined in our municipal code as short-term property. Short-term rental property means any residential property in the municipal limits of the town of Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, that in whole or in part is offered for lease or occupancy under a lease or any other form of agreement for periods of less than 30 days. In the balance of the Sea Pine Circle District, short-term rental properties are allowed with a short-term rental permit. Certainly, short-term rental use intensities are generally greater than residential use intensity. The workforce housing requirement does sunset, but this prohibition of short-term rentals as proposed in the policy does not sunset. So one would assume that there would be more properties or more units that are on the long-term market and don't transition over to short-term. There's a workforce housing component in the use-specific conditions. It does differ from the town's workforce housing program in a couple of ways, and they're outlined here. One, it's the percent of units in workforce housing. They're proposing in the use-specific condition, 15% of the units be in workforce housing. The town's program requires 20. The area median income proposed in this amendment is up to 130% of the area median income for Beaufort County. And the town's workforce housing program has AMIs for rental units that range between 60 and 80% AMI and owner-occupied units between 80 and 100% AMI. And as well as the term of a workforce housing agreement, under mixed-use term is that the units are kept in workforce housing agreement for 10 years, and the town's requirement is 30 years. And then the most significant change is the density. Islander mixed-use proposal is undefined density. Workforce housing in this district is allowed through the commercial conversion workforce housing program, which is based on the existing building envelope and the minimum unit sizes that are in a chart in a table within the code in section 1610. There's a condition that relates to the minimum average unit size. The minimum average unit size of 750 square feet per dwelling unit is required. And what this condition does is it regulates the unit sizes in the development overall and prevents a development with a large quantity of micro units. And we have, because this has a proposal that is for undefined density, this particular condition helps regulate the scale of the development in some way. So you wouldn't have a very large quantity of dwelling units that are very small. So it requires an average unit size, dwelling unit size throughout the development. So this proposal does have a floor area ratio, and they're proposing a maximum of 0.68. Floor area ratio is a measurement of the building's total floor area in relationship to the size of the lot or parcel. And we've done an analysis of floor area ratios around Hilton Head Island, as well as within the vicinity of this particular text amendment. Floor area ratio is not a requirement for other uses in the Sea Pines Circle District. On the screen in front of you are some floor area ratios of some developments around the island. 32 Office Park is 0.36, Seabrook is 0.76. Again, they're proposing 0.68 for their maximum floor area ratio. The rest of the projects listed here exceed the floor area ratio proposed. So the Seabrook, Aquaterra, Courtyard, the Marriott, Waterwalk 1 and 2, the Cypress, and the Bayshore. We have some pictures later on where we'll show some of those buildings. And then specifically within the 500-foot radius where this proposal is for, we analyzed to discover what the context is currently of the built environment within 500 feet. Certainly there are low FARs within the area, and only one of them exceeds the floor area ratio that's proposed. So here are some of the images that go along with the various floor area ratios. Here are some of the buildings on Office Way and the associated floor area ratios of 0.27, 0.25, 0.17. This is 32 Office Park with a floor area ratio of 0.36. Seabrook at a floor area ratio of 0.76. Aquaterra is a collection of buildings for a floor area ratio of 0.82. The Courtyard by Marriott is a floor area ratio of 1.36. Waterwalk 1, a floor area ratio of 1.82. Waterwalk 2, floor area ratio of 2.04. Cypress has a floor area ratio of 2.79. The Bayshore at 3.69.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question before you go on to this chart? I apologize if I'm asking you a mathematical computation that you haven't done, but in looking at similar housing for floor area ratios, the slide you just showed us, have you done an average of what those would be? It appears as though it'd be closer to 1. And if you haven't done that mathematical computation, then I'm not asking you to do it in your head right now, but can you go back to those last 3 or 4 slides that actually show housing floor area ratio? Yeah. No, keep going.
Oh, which ones?
Yeah, go forward. Okay, stop there. Seabrook. So for instance, that one is 0.76. And then go to the next one. Then we got 0.82. Then you can say, throw out the motel one, hotel one, then Waterwalk is 1.82. And then the next one, Waterwalk 2. Anyhow, yeah, it's a complicated calculation, but suffice it to say, just looking at it, it appears as though the FAR is above 1, the average. So that's my point, is that when we look at the next slide that you're getting ready to show with that matrix, it's important to remember that existing housing that you've shown in these slides is at least 1.0 and above the average.
But it's complicated because it's the amount of land in the parcel. And
That as well.
dramatically vary.
Yeah, it can make a difference with regard to your floor area ratio. So, and then the office areas appear to be a lower floor area ratio. So, okay, thank you.
Okay. So in addition to a floor area ratio, the applicant's proposing a site coverage index. This slide shows both the floor area ratio and the site coverage index. The 0.68 floor area ratio is showcased, and we have color coded the one that shows the 50% site coverage index. A site coverage index of 50% is what is proposed, so not to exceed 50%. Again, that is the building footprint coverage on the site, so the building footprint itself can't exceed 50%.
But let me ask a question just to make sure I understand. The LMO also has a site coverage that isn't just building, it's impervious surface.
Yep.
How do those two work together?
We
Because parking isn't included in this particular definition.
That's correct. And that's where the impervious coverage would cover any parking or other structures or lot coverage. So that impervious coverage limitation would
So
also.
it's impervious coverage, this definition of site coverage, and then FAR, working together.
Correct.
Okay.
So question on the FAR and the site coverage. The difference is in the case of site coverage, how much of the buildings are going to occupy the available land. And in the case of floor area ratio, you count the stories of the building and therefore what the impact is on the land. Is that a fair distinction?
So floor area ratio is the total gross floor area divided by the lot size, and the site coverage index is just your footprint. So it's really just the first floor.
So footprint versus mass.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so they're different measures, but all of it has to do with the impact on the site and the impact on the community.
Correct.
Thank you.
Parking.
And in addition, you know, the site also has setbacks and buffers and other requirements as well that all are required in addition to these additional use-specific conditions that are proposed.
See, when you get down to the design aspect of it, in terms of pervious, impervious, that's where the recommendation or the necessity becomes what type of surface we're parking on and what type of other amenities there might be and whether or not their ability to absorb water, runoff, et cetera. Is that correct?
Sure. I
So
mean,
it's the design that comes next within that requirement of impervious, that will be critical in term for that purpose, for impervious. I just want to make sure because we are talking about how much of the land is covered, but then I want to know how much of that leftover land is available for absorption, pervious absorption of water and runoff.
sure. So the stormwater requirements that apply to all development would still apply. So they would still have to manage stormwater and meet all of the other requirements within the code.
And that's not restricted by this analysis of 50% or better. I see that it's proposed at 17%, and but your comment is not restricted by anything that we see here in terms of building mass and scale.
It looks like that label is incorrect. It's proposed at 50%, the site coverage index.
But it's not, our requirements in terms of pervious land is not restricted or compromised by this amount.
They would have to meet they would have to balance meeting all of the requirements for this use, the use-specific conditions, as well as the other requirements, including impervious
The
coverage.
design becomes an important element later. Okay, just wanted to get to that.
So open space, they're proposing a use-specific condition that requires 10% functional open space or common amenity space Currently, Sea Pine Circle District only requires open space if it's a major single-family residential development. In that case, 16% is required. So if this was a regular by right mixed use, there would not be an open space requirement. This adds additional functional open space to the development.
But in terms of when we're talking about design, right? I know that recently we've imposed review that speaks to whether or not the design is Hilton Head-esque, that is what we want to see in a final product. So all of those elements still come into play. Nothing gets washed away by this. We're still reviewing it to make sure that the design, the layout, et cetera, meets all of what we want to see as a standard development on the island moving forward.
Yes, correct. So if this were to pass, then as this comes in through plan review, there's just a lot more conditions that apply to this development review that don't apply to other uses. And then it would still go through all of the regular public process, design review board, review by the planning commission, et cetera, for a major development plan.
So nothing changes with that.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, one question about the phrase 10% functional open space or common amenity space. So I think I understand open space, but is common amenity defined so that, you know, if we're talking about open space, if you have a swimming pool or a racquetball court, is that included in the open space or not? And I don't know whether that's clear.
The intent was that if they had a racquetball, tennis court, that could be part of their common amenity space or functional open space. So it could be either a lawn area that is available to the tenants or users of the site, or some sort of a common amenity space. Could be community building with a pool, but something that provides some usability for common amenity for the tenants.
Yeah, to me, those are two different things. Open space is clearly open space. If you start adding a swimming pool and a pool building, then that's, I mean, yeah, there's open space above the water, the swimming pool, but that's more like an improvement to the site. So anyhow, maybe some clarification there.
Also, does the LMO now allow a detention pond to be considered open space? Are they separate items?
Currently, during plan review, we're requesting that stormwater ponds are not included in the open space calculation. However, there is nothing that restricts that currently. It will be something that we will look at recommending changing.
So we're talking about 10% of an area yet to be determined, whether it includes retention ponds, whether it includes, I don't think there's any wet areas on this, but other than that, we don't know what this 10% is going to be applied to at this point.
Not necessarily. Yes, it could be open lawn area. It could be, again, like a tennis court or racquetball or, you know, a pavilion.
Fire pit, all of these things, sure.
Oh, your sidekick's coming up behind you.
No, you're a common amenity.
Sean Colin, Assistant Town Manager, but I'm also the LMO official for the town. I don't want to get too deep into interpretations, but when I think of functional open space, Stormwater Lagoon is not a functional open space, right? It has to be something that functions for people. And so it would be the items that Missy had mentioned there, some kind of amenity, recreation related, or whether it's active or passive. So anyway, that would be how I would handle this provision.
Thank you.
I also think that speaks to what I was trying to get at, that as we're looking at designs moving forward, we're looking at places that create community, that it's not just a place to park your car and put your head at night, but a place that creates community. And so that's the way I see that space ultimately playing out.
There's a use-specific condition that requires an adjacent street setback that shall meet or exceed an average of 35 feet. Currently, Sea Pine Circle District uses have to meet the setbacks per our setback table. Another street, which is Office Way, would be a 20-foot setback. A minor arterial, which is Greenwood, would be 40 feet. A major arterial, such as Pope Avenue, would be 50. The language currently suggests 35 feet meet or exceed. Certainly, the minor arterial and major arterial require those to be higher. So we're suggesting that the language be changed to Islander mixed use requires an adjacent street setback that shall meet or exceed an average of 35 feet or the minimum setback distance required per table 165102C, whichever is greater. And that modification means that it would be a greater average setback if it was on an other street. However, if it was on a major or minor arterial, then the existing setbacks would apply. So density, of course, is a measurement of intensity on a parcel of land. And the way our code calculates density for residential, it's calculated by dividing the total number of dwelling units by the net acreage of the parcel. For non-residential, it's dividing the total number of square feet of gross floor area by the net acreage. In mixed use, the acreage allocated to residential is not used to calculate non-residential, and acreage allocated for non-residential is not allocated for residential and vice versa. So it's an and/or between those. In Sea Pine Circle District, the density is 12 dwelling units per net acre for residential and/or 10,000 gross floor area per net acre for non-residential. The proposal, of course, is for undefined density that's limited by design and performance standards such as height, parking, lot coverage, setbacks, buffers. The only other district in the code that currently has undefined density is the Coligny Resort District. And in that district, it has undefined density and again is governed by those design standards that we talked about. So we did analyze we created an assessment table in the packet. There were a couple of possible conceptual developments that were analyzed. We looked at each of those, including 5,623 feet of retail. And then from that, the number of dwelling units varied. We looked at or created a fictional workforce housing commercial conversion concept. It showed 44 dwelling units and resulted in 11 dwelling unit per acre effective density. There was a mixed-use development concept, a by right concept that the applicant provided, and it showed 45 dwelling units and came out at a 10 dwelling unit per effective density. And then their Islander mixed-use development that they have as a proposal is for 133 dwelling units, and its effective density is 31 dwelling units per acre.
Missy, excuse me. It says 5,623 square feet of retail. Does a restaurant fall under retail? Or do we need a different word than retail?
Yes, they were anticipating that being a restaurant use. That's a commercial use.
Does the LMO say distinguish between retail and restaurant?
Yeah, it's an eating establishment use.
Okay, I think I'm raising the question as to whether or not the text amendment should be restricting this to retail if an end user wants to do restaurant, or do we have to have a more general term?
The use definition doesn't specify retail. In fact, it covers if it were to be an eating establishment, the definition for the use.
I'm just picking on this one line where it sounds restrictive, but.
Does it use commercial maybe? Or?
Sure. So the use is the development that includes two or more different uses, which shall include multifamily or workforce housing, and one or more of the office uses described in 1610-103F, or one or more of the commercial service uses, which is an eating establishment, or some combination thereof.
Missy, if you're comfortable with this line, I am. I just raised the question because I'm under the impression that we're not going to retail, we're going to attorneys.
Sure. And this isn't verbiage that's in the code.
Yeah, the way the code reads, it's for non-residential, I think it's 10,000 square feet per acre. So it doesn't really distinguish between the restaurant, retail. So for the analysis, it's not critical here. And in the code, if it's a restaurant, it's fine. If they did a different type of commercial service, it'd be fine.
Right?
Missy, not being a planner, I am troubled by the concept of undefined density. I can't quite get my hands around that. Will the final unit number and therefore density be something that is subject to approval or disapproval by the town?
Well, as proposed, if it meets all of the use-specific conditions, then if they, whatever density that they can achieve, meeting the floor area ratio, the site coverage index, the required open space, the average setback, workforce, all of those components, then,
That results in an answer, is what you're saying.
yes. So there is no density limit. It's undefined, but there are a number of conditions that provide some guardrails, if you will, to that undefined density.
That's what I'm looking for, is the protection that it can't be expanded. So long as it fits within the parameters of all the conditions you're laying out, that will define what the ultimate density is.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I think that's a very important point here. Because as you say, density is a measure of intensity, if you will. And you described it as guardrail. So I think it'd be very helpful if this project moves, if this text amendment request moves forward, to talk about it with regard to intensity on a site, and that here are the guardrails or the performance standards that will be used to control intensity without, because I'm not a fan of no density. But if you look at it that way with performance standards, then that does govern the intensity of the use, the mass, the scale, the height on the site. And I think it'd be important for that to be covered here.
Well, and I know Sean's here. Our residential density, a dwelling unit is one dwelling unit, whether it's 10,000 square feet or 400 square feet. So, like what is being proposed in this particular instance are smaller units. And so the density and the effective density is higher at 31 dwelling units, but may be similar to other developments. So
Yeah, well, good point. Because I look at it two ways. One, density, if you have, 1,000 square foot units, if a unit's 2,000 square feet, from a massing and scale, it's the same as two 1,000 square foot units. So I'm looking at it more from intensity of development. And I do want to point out when the LMO was overhauled years ago, and the Coligny district recommendation was to not have a density, not to have a cap on density. We did a sort of an evaluation to determine what the box would look like if you were to redevelop Coligny Plaza. And it went to about 15,000 square feet per acre rather than 10, with all of the performance standards, and that has slightly higher height. So capping the height, setbacks, buffers, the recommendations that are part of this use condition, paint a box. And so density's tough because our definition of unit is problematic. Intensity, mass scale, bulk. I think this is the same or less intense than what could be built potentially by right there. But there are those safeguards with the performance standards that limit the overall mass scale. If that's an answer that you're.
That helps some. Thank you.
And I think we're looking forward to the definition of unit being a part of the LMO discussions.
So here are just some examples of some effective residential densities of other sites. Water Walk Apartments at Shelter Cove are 23 and 22 dwelling units per acre. Aquaterra is 19 dwelling units per acre. Harbortown overall is about 22 dwelling units per acre. So Also, this kind of highlights the dwelling unit definition that was just discussed. The proposal the applicant team supplied for their by right mixed-use project that was made up 20 or 45 dwelling units was to consist of 25 8-bedroom units and 20 12-bedroom units. So you can see that those are likely larger unit sizes. And I think that also, they were anticipating that was 440 bedrooms as well. So that type of development, could occur and meet the dwelling unit calculation and density calculation that exists in Sea Pine Circle District. Certainly, having a high bedroom count per dwelling is not prohibited. It may or may not meet the market demands because it would be difficult to meet the parking required or the parking that would be required by the market.
Missy, I'm going to interject something here from a historical standpoint. I think what that points out, and there are other examples in the Sea Pines district, is that when in 2014, we were making amendments to the LMO, we didn't do the in-depth homework that we need to do in order to anticipate unintended consequences. But clearly that is inconsistent with what I think the community was asking for in 2014.
So as part of the staff recommendation, I think it was a little bit in reaction to the by right proposal. We're recommending that an additional condition be added to the text amendment to require a maximum of 4 bedrooms per unit for Islanders mixed use. Parking requirements have been shared a little bit. There's 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit for residential and 1 per 500 for the non-residential. There's the shared parking agreement allowance, as well as shared parking on education use property if there is student housing as part of a shared parking agreement. We allow shared parking plans in the code already. There are a number of conditions that are part of the shared parking section. Shared parking plans allow up to 50% of parking spaces to be used to satisfy the number of parking spaces required, provided the uses generate parking demands during different times of the day or different times of the week. And then a parking agreement is required, and that would be reviewed and approved among the owners of lands containing the uses proposed to share the parking spaces, and it gets recorded with Beaufort County Register of Deeds.
Sorry, need to ask a question there. I'm a fan of shared parking because I like less impervious area. But the control over this, now there is, this allows shared parking, the proposed text, is that correct? And the only control over that now as to how much of it can be shared parking is this 50% based on different times of day or different days of the week. So what's to prevent all of it from being shared parking? Except for this control here.
Well, only 50% of the required off-street parking is eligible to be part of a shared parking plan. So
if someone came in and say, built student housing on the whole site, if that would be allowed, I don't even, at this point, I can't even figure that out in my head. So would that mean that if there's so many, let's say you need 150 spaces, then could 75 of those spaces be located? And I didn't pick that number for any reason, just a thought of it. 75 could be shared, but what if 300 spaces were required? Could 150 be shared if it met that requirement there? That is different times of day and different days of the week.
Sure. You also have to look at the two sites, and is there that number or quantity of parking spaces available to be shared based on the uses and what's required from the site that is making shared parking available. So that would happen at the development review level and when that parking agreement is reviewed as part of that development application.
I'm just wanting to make sure, obviously the question is, what's the maximum and is this enough control here? So existing sites that already have parking that would be shared, they would still have to comply with their requirements for their use.
Yes.
May I just ask a question? I guess it's a question. I think a lot of that would be limited by what USCB is willing to offer up. So at some point, their own analysis in terms of what they need for faculty and visiting students and whoever becomes part of their calculus. And I can't imagine they would give up 100% of their parking to accommodate any future development. At least in my mind, that seems like a safe bet, though I probably would love to hear from the university itself on that.
Yes, the university they would analyze what parking is required. We would still require that they meet the parking that's required per the land management ordinance. And again, we wouldn't allow a shared parking agreement that puts somebody out of conformance with what's required.
And the university is the only educational building within the 500 feet, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, just making sure the point.
The shared parking, the linkage to shared parking agreement and student housing, if it's on education use owned property. However, the bullet above, that is a use-specific condition. Parking spaces are eligible to be included as part of a shared parking agreement. So it doesn't necessarily have to be on education use property, but if it is, then it has to have a student housing component.
Missy, this says educational use. Does that apply to the school campus at the north end of the property, island?
That is also an education use. However, this only applies to Sea Pine Circle District. But yes, all schools are considered an education use. Okay. So the height, there is no change to the height requirements. So all development within Sea Pine Circle is limited to 45 feet. There are no changes proposed to impervious coverage requirements. The maximum impervious coverage for all development is 60%. Again, we covered the differences in open space. So for single-family residential, 16% of open space is required. Mixed use does not require open space in the Sea Pine Circle District, and this proposal is proposing 10% functional open space or common amenity space. Setbacks and buffers. So all other required setbacks besides the adjacent street setback condition that they're proposing are required to be met per the setback tables in the code. We talked about the workforce housing requirement. Workforce housing is supported by a number of documents that the town has. We have a 2019 Workforce Housing Strategic Plan that includes a number of recommendations, the 2022 Workforce Housing Framework, Finding Home, as well as our plan, our comprehensive plan for the island, has a number of housing goals and strategies and tactics. So workforce housing certainly is something that is a priority for the town. So we've reviewed the proposal for about a year now. Again, I've identified that there are some slight changes to two of the use-specific conditions for clarity purposes. And then we have a recommendation for that 4-bedroom maximum to add as an additional use-specific condition. There are review standards for text amendments to the code that should be considered. And that, looking at a text amendment and its compatibility with our comp plan, also looking at the conditions, community need, consistent with zoning, a logical and orderly development pattern, and looking that it wouldn't have significant adverse impacts are some of the things to consider when making a decision on a text amendment. And I understand the applicant is also going to make a presentation as well, but that concludes my presentation.
Any questions of Missy at this time?
Excellent job, Missy.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Missy.
Missy. We at this time invite the applicant to come forward. Good morning.
Morning. Thanks, Missy. My name is Josh Tiller. I'm with JK Tiller Associates. I'm the land planner on the project. And I'm going to do my best to be as brief as possible. We have been here a long time, and Missy had a very comprehensive presentation. And between her presentation and some of the public comment, I'm going to try to breeze through my presentation and not repeat a lot of what's already been said. I'm here representing the owner, Mr. David Despain. We've also got Lewis Hammett here and Tom Parker, who's the architect. So if there's any questions about architecture or any legal issues, they're happy to chime in on that. I'm confident that this proposed text amendment will go a long way to solving I think it's a critical issue of affordable service industry and student housing on this island. I did my master's thesis on affordable housing, so I'm familiar with what's required, and I feel this proposal checks off a lot of those boxes. Advance. This is some old data. I was kind of shocked to see that the young lady who presented earlier said that the new median income or new median property value is up to $850,000. So these numbers have jumped up a little bit since 2020. I'm going to go through some of the key aspects of this proposed text amendment, and then later I'm going to go through our actual proposed site plan and how it complies with this text amendment. Some of this I'm going to do my best not to repeat, so I'm going to breeze through these. This is a redevelopment of a blighted area. Mr. Ames, I know you're well aware since you do occupy space there as one of Mr. Despain's tenants. But
Incredibly high rents.
But it's not a greenfield project. It's a redevelopment of a blighted area. We're here to support local businesses and provide opportunities for their employees for housing. We're providing student housing at no cost to the taxpayer. And this will only enhance the $20 million investment the town made in the USCB campus. It does address a need for employee housing. It's a market-based approach. This is not only just service industry, it's for students, it's for future interns, it's graduates who are interns, recent grads, can be nurses, police, firemen, teachers, adjunct professors that might be employed at the university. We got to think beyond just the service industry. This proposal, it'll promote walkability, it'll promote improve traffic. It encourages transportation by bicycle. We provide a lot of parking opportunities for bicycles, and I know the town's looking to get a platinum accreditation from the League of American Bicyclists for the town, and this will only add to that opportunity. It's good for water quality. The site redevelops will come into compliance with the current stormwater ordinance. I think that's important for the water quality in the area. It does align with the future district plan for the island, and I'll go into a little more detail later on in the presentation. I think Missy hit on some of those points. It does prohibit short-term rentals, and I think that's a good thing. We have limited building massing, and that's a function of increased setbacks, floor area ratio, and Missy went into that as well, and I'll expand upon that later. It does provide workforce housing. In accordance with the proposed workforce housing agreement, 15% of these units will be dedicated to workforce housing. offering affordable rental options for households earning up to 130% of the AMI, and that's for 10 years. It does preserve the island feel. Missy mentioned, and I think Mrs. Bryson mentioned, the guardrails in place to control that through setbacks and buffers and the FAR. We have agreed to stick to the 45-foot height limit for our buildings, and that's down from 54 that we proposed last time we were in front of you. And this use, it'll fall under the current Sea Pine Circle District zoning. Zoning's not changing. It's just a change in use within that zoning. And it is compatible with the surrounding area. Currently, and I'm going to expand upon kind of the massing scale. And Missy mentioned in her presentation that, she provided some examples of floor area ratios for some developments that have been in question. And, we're at 0.68, and that's our limit. That's really what's going to control the density on this site. And the difference here, we've got, and I want to get into the definition of the site coverage index, and that's just that percentage of the footprint on the site. And there was a slide earlier in Missy's presentation that showed some of the floor area ratio of some of the adjacent parcels. And a lot of them are in the 0.14 to 0.21, that range of floor area ratio. And to be fair, a lot of those adjacent parcels are just one story. When you factor in one story, we fall well within that site coverage index, which would be reflective of a one-story building. So where our site coverage index is at 17%, which is a lot less than some of those surrounding developments. We put a limit on the max amount of the site coverage index, 50%. That's going to be very difficult to achieve because we do have to factor in parking. And I don't see, if we're doing surface parking, I don't see anybody ever achieving that 50%. They might, if they do a parking structure, it might be possible. Most likely, the 17 to 25% range for the site coverage index is more likely, especially if you factor in parking and stormwater. This development, the proposed development, will be bicycle friendly. Will promote improved traffic and walkability. Bicycle friendly. We anticipate an elevated number of students and residents will prioritize bicycle transportation in lieu of automobiles. As a result, the proposed plan includes a total of 66 spaces for bicycles and the ability to accommodate more if needed. And earlier this week, I went over to that new Sea Pines housing development that's out on Target Road. Just took some photos of the area, and it's not what you see, it's what you don't see. There's very few cars there. Aside from my car, there's only 4 cars parked there, but there's an abundance of bicycles scattered throughout the site. So we see this functioning similarly in our proposed property, especially with students involved. Missy hit on the Mid-Island District, and we looked at the Mid-Island District plan, in particular the mixed-use portion of the Mid-Island District. Our proposal does have compatible uses within that district. Our density, Ms. mentioned we were technically at 33 units per acre on the property. But if you look at it from a kind of just a function, when you include the parking offsite on the university side, if you factor those units out, we actually do fall within this density for the property. That's just factoring out those units tied to those parking spaces also. We do meet the height recommendation. One thing that's you have to consider in the Mid-Island District is you've got the FAA hazard areas you got to deal with. You've also got the AQ zones. We don't have to deal with those height limitations you find in the Mid-Island District. Another thing that was interesting about the Mid-Island District recommendation was shared structured parking and surface spots throughout the district. And this also is in compliance with that Mid-Island District. This is kind of an image of what that density looks like within the Mid-Island District plan. I think ours is different. Just eyeballing this looks from a floor area ratio is probably double what we're proposing. These buildings occupy nearly 100% of the site. Some factors to consider. And we looked at the comprehensive plan and kind of went through to see if we checked off the boxes in the comprehensive plan. And you've got a great plan, and it's certainly something you all can lean on when you're considering this text amendment. This pursuit of excellence, this property and this redevelopment is better than what is currently. It provides students a place to live, work, learn, and play all in one place. We're within very short distance of the beach and Celebration Park and other establishments nearby. We're going to be more environmentally sustainable than we currently are. The site is currently. It's certainly going to revitalize and modernize this site and the local economy here. It fosters an inclusive and multi-dimensional community, especially when you factor in the housing. Building a connected and collaborative community fabric. It expands to embrace an integral regional focus, especially with the educational component that's tied to this text amendment. And it's innovative in its approach to creating a right-sized infrastructure. And this is interesting because this is pulled directly from the comprehensive plan. But one thing it did note is that the town should continue to assess development standards and building codes to foster private sector development of needed and diverse attainable housing options. And this is certainly one of those opportunities in a sense. Certainly, is this a required by changing conditions? Certainly with this new investment, the university, the need for student housing is much needed, especially for the success of the $20 million investment by the town. It does demonstrate a community need, not only for students, but for our service industry workers to provide housing for them. Certainly consistent with the zoning districts. And it results in a logical and orderly development pattern within our district, mainly because it falls in line with that future district plan. Because this is a redevelopment, we're not developing a greenfield here, it certainly doesn't have any significant adverse impacts to the natural environment. Skip through that one. Just so everyone here attending the meeting is familiar with the site, this is Sea Pine Circle, Greenwood Drive, Hope Avenue. This is Office Way and then Office Brook Road. The site here is our 4.3 acre site that's surrounded by Riley's Plaza, the Courtyard Building, PNC Bank, and of course, the USC Buford Hilton Head campus to the south. This basic property description and the current zoning by right standards. Missy went through those earlier. This is a survey of the site, some existing buildings here, not in great condition. I think it's been mentioned numerous times. This is a view of the property with your back facing Hope Avenue. You're on Office Way. The site is over here to the right. This portion isn't highly vegetated, but it's proposed to be vegetated after this development. This access point will slide further down towards Office or Pope Avenue. This is a view of the intersection at Office Park and Office Way. What's important here, you got USCB campus to the left here, is this existing canopy of trees will remain, and that's a function of that additional buffer we're proposing for the island of mixed use text. Another view of that same buffer that will be preserved. You got USC campus. This is looking back towards Pope along Office Park Road, and then of course the development site here to the left. Here's a view of some of those dilapidated buildings, and including one that's, there's some boarded up windows. It's not a, hopefully that's not David's office space there.
I've been enjoying it for years.
But we're looking to improve this situation. This is a plan. It's not the plan, but it certainly fits all the factors outlined and conditions outlined in the proposed text. And it, in fact, exceeds some of those guardrails that Missy mentioned. Again, we've got Office Way here, Office Park Road. To the south is the USCB campus where we'll have our shared parking. There's a safe pedestrian crossing here that will be signalized. So we'll have safe access there. We've got an access point here on Office Park Road and one on Office Park Way. I believe the existing access point is here. We're proposed to add additional buffer trees and plantings along that stretch to help screen some of the buildings at the site. One thing to note, the text amendment does require an average 35-foot setback. We actually see that this is the 20-foot minimum. We'd have to meet that at a minimum. We're actually, our closest point is about 30 feet off of the property line here. And it's something that's back in here along this facade of the building, very close to 100 feet. So we more than exceed that average. The text proposes 35 feet because you have to factor in all the other parcels that can take advantage of this property. And it might mean that some of these parcels can't take advantage of it if we were to increase that too much. So we had to consider those parcels as well. The site, the parking is to the rear, which is in compliance with the Mid-Island study. So we've got a street frontage here. Some of that 10% of open space, active open space, is included in this area. This is the student housing building, and some of these areas back here, as well as back here for gatherings. There could be fire pits, grilling stations, a lot of opportunities. These become little pocket parks within the development. Here we have the main, this would be the service-related housing. We've got separate student housing. This portion of the building here is like a commercial facility, and it has a volume of 2 floors. But we're limited to 5,200 square feet. We meet all the parking standards, both for on-site and off-site. All these parking spaces are proposed to be pervious. Again, that will help to contribute to improving water quality within the area. This is kind of a conceptual layout of the building floor plan. And again, we're limited to a minimum average of 750 square feet for each unit. And that is what enables us to get to that higher density. If we were to increase those, course, our density would drop and we'd probably be closer to some of the densities that this had compared us to. But in order to provide affordable housing, you've got to have smaller units. That's why we arrived at our density. And I think there are guardrails in place. I don't see us getting beyond the current density, not without either coming in violation of that minimum square footage or exceeding parameters of the setbacks and floor area ratio related to the rest of the site. We do have a parking agreement and support from USCB, and we're thankful for them providing that support for us. They did do an internal parking study of their property, and they determined that they did have a surplus of 75 spaces. And basically, they don't have any more spaces to give up beyond what they provided us. So I don't see any more shared parking being provided on their campus. We've also got commitment letters from some of the island's largest employers, including, not shown here, but Shore Beach Service. I believe they've agreed to occupy student housing during summer months. Students are in town. That is all I've got, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Good. Thank you. Glenn, you have any questions?
I think you've given a thorough presentation here, Josh, and I appreciate that. My concern about this project has to do with, one, for all practical purposes, as I see it, we are creating a building use category for one property owner. That troubles me. I realize that there's some other properties that are touched, but I don't know about the feasibility of this use being applied there. I think I understand now about undefined density, which I didn't understand before. Missy straightened me out on that. And so I understand that you have the other characteristics of this, which limit what that effective density would be. Those concerns are outweighed by the positive factors about this project, in my mind. Redeveloping a blighted site, obviously needs to be needed. Providing dwelling space for service workers on the island, which are sorely needed. Providing some workforce housing. I'd like to see more. I'd like to see a longer term of that. And certainly no short-term rentals. So I see a creative project. I'm not really ready at this point to say yes or no, but I've shared with you some of the concerns that I've got, and you've answered many of my questions, so thank you.
Tim?
Well, thank you all for your presentations today. It was an incredible amount of information. I hope everyone understands the project, I think, as well as we do at this point. This project, in my mind, the purpose of this project satisfies a need and a commitment that the town made several years ago to take construction, commercial buildings and to rehab them. And when not able to rehab them, perhaps reconstruct something in their place that would serve the needs of our workforce, our service industry, however you define that. It's my understanding that in addition to the student housing, which since I've been a council member has been something that various people from the university have spoken to me about and asked how we could help. So now I see an opportunity to do that, to help the university get the student housing that they need to increase their enrollment. I'm always proud that we have USCB here on the island, and I want them to continue to prosper, to grow, and be successful. I think it's to the benefit of our community and every one of our residents that they do so. And in terms of the offering for workforce housing, it seems to me that it is, if not 100% workforce housing, close to it. And so I'm not bothered by the 15, 20% or any of that because the underlying purpose and intent of the project satisfies that for me. I'm grateful and appreciative that the height limit was brought down as I had requested. That was a non-compromise position that I was in, and now it's satisfied. I've mentioned, I think the architecture, the design will really speak to what it is that if I have any concerns, that's where they lie. To make sure that we develop something that is, that satisfies all of what I just talked about. But Hilton Head is a funny place. We want that, right? We need that. We've stated it as a priority, but we don't want to see it. So keeping that buffer, keeping the buildings low and creating a community space that reflects the values of Hilton Head and isn't just an institutional building is critically important. So that design architecture will be very important to me as this project hopefully moves along. And so with that, I will stop my comments and thank you all again for the presentation, for the hard work, for acknowledging or helping us to prove to the community that the private sector is ready and willing. We just have to work with them. And that's where I personally believe this type of project should come from. Our workforce housing needs, et cetera, needs to be provided by the private without helping to support them without involving tax dollars. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tiller, for your presentation and the staff as well, and for the work over 2 years to get us to this place. There's a lot of things I like about this, but I have to confess that I spent 31 years of my professional life as a zoning and land use attorney, so forgive me if I get wonky at any time. And part of that is to remember that this is a text amendment that we're considering, as opposed to we're reviewing and approving a plan. It's not a zoning map amendment. It's not consideration of a plan. So I'm going to stay focused as best I can on the text itself. Secondly, I want to thank you and your team for agreeing to the 9 changes since our January meeting that Ms. Lewick pointed out on, I think it was the second page of her staff report, to agree to those 9. In the staff report on page 14, there are 3 additional recommendations that the staff has made to include in the text. And are you and your team comfortable with those 3 text amendments is a question I have. Sure, I'll do my best to read them out here. It's on 14. There's 2 use-specific conditions. Number 1, Islander mixed-use development may utilize shared parking on education use property if the development provides student housing. And the second one is Islander mixed use requires an adjacent street setback that shall meet or exceed an average of 35 feet or the minimum setback distance required per table 16-5-102.c, whichever is greater.
Those first 2 definitely.
Okay, all right. And then the third one is an additional use-specific condition as follows. Islander mixed use shall require a 4-bedroom per dwelling unit maximum. Is that also acceptable?
We're thinking about it. We feel that the limit on the 750 square foot minimum average kind of pushes us in that, puts us in that position there. I don't see us, I think we would exceed that if we went beyond 40 units. So we're certainly thinking about it.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. The other thing to say generally is, again, thinking just of a text amendment. I like the concept a lot because I like mixed use. I like shared parking, and I like a less impermeable area, as I've always said. I also look for the intensity of use on the area. And I think that the guardrails or performance standards that we've spoken about will help with that. I've never been a fan of no density requirements. I've seen what happens to that. And under our existing LMO, and I do not like that. So I'm glad to see additional conditions which help to monitor the intensity of the use in this zoning district, say it that way. I also like working in concert with an educational use. And I also like the walkability of the community. Other disclosure is I used to live just south of here in South Forest Beach. My husband and I walked in this area. We walked from where we lived in South Forest Beach up to the shopping center. We would go to the movie at Mad Park Plaza. We would go to eat dinner either before or after the movie in that same area. I biked or walked to CVS Pharmacy. I biked or walked to Bank of America, but when it was a bank. We went to a number of restaurants in the area, did a lot of walking and biking in this area. I consider this to be a walkable community, and I'm glad that this text amendment considers it as a walkable community. I had asked for a comparison to our Mid-Island district because we've already adopted that district and it uses mixed use. I'm glad to see the comparison that the staff provided. So thank you very much for doing that. And thank you to you and your team for providing us with additional information. Because we're moving towards district planning, as you've heard us discuss today. And so, part of the question is, should we go ahead with a text amendment before we do a district plan for this area? And so what I wanted to do was to look at how this compares to one district we'd already done when considering walkable mixed use. And I see a lot of good comparisons. I've never been a fan, in addition to no density, I've never been a fan of a one-off text amendment to address one project. So I look to see, usually when you make a text amendment, you look at, can it be replicated? Is it to address multiple kind of situations and uses? So hence me thinking, is something like this, can you replicate it in other districts? And that's why the comparison to Mid-Island District was important to me, to see if, not being line by line, because certainly you wouldn't find a lot of educational uses that you could share parking with. But because of the other kind of guardrails, while increasing the possibility of housing and also other uses on the same site, mixed use, because that's the kind of replication that this appears, it appears as though you could replicate this in other zoning districts that are somewhat comparable, such as Mid-Island. I'm sorry for keeping going back to that one, but that's what helps me with considering this text amendment. In addition to that, the staff report, as I said, mentions the intensity controls, but also on page 14 of the staff report gives us the standards to look at for text amendments. Again, we're doing a text amendment, not a map amendment, and not a plan approval. So is it in accordance with the comprehensive plan? The staff says yes. Is it required by change conditions? Yes. Does it address a demonstrated community need? Yes. Is it consistent with the purpose and intent of the zoning districts, or would improve compatibility among uses and ensure efficient development within the town? And if you look at the comparable uses in the area, I think it does fit with that. And that's why I asked the staff to point out that particular sentence in the staff report about its compatibility with other uses in the existing Sea Pines district. Would it result in a logical and orderly development pattern? Again, I've talked about the walkability of the area. It would not result in significantly adverse impacts on the natural environment, including but not limited to water, air, noise, stormwater management, wildlife, vegetation, wetlands, and the natural functioning of the environment. And the idea of buffering and open use standards, I am a little bit bothered by the 10%, including, what's the language, common amenities. The other thing I'll point out is that I actually did look at the traffic impact analysis. I did not review all the calculations. I don't like to do that. But on pages 14 and 17, I looked not just at the intersection at Sea Pine Circle, but at the intersection of Office Park Road with Pope Avenue. And just looking at the level of service in comparing existing to 2025 build out, it's the same level, not much less different, not much difference, not much decline in the level of service. It's not good there. Don't get me wrong about that. The town is looking at corridor studies to improve some of those intersection performances, and that corridor, Pope Avenue, is one of them. So I didn't see anything in the part of the traffic impact analysis I looked at which would dissuade me from this text amendment. Finally, there are some issues I think that need to be addressed, and I know the staff asked us for this, and I'm sorry to go on and look to you, but some of it is a response to questions of would you accept? And I've already covered the 3 staff recommendations, 2 out of 3, yes, 1 you're still considering. Then I do think that we need to look at a longer term for workforce housing. Our current standard in the LMO is 30 years. This text amendment says 10 years. I'd like to see that move north, closer to the 30. Maybe there's some compromise, so I'd ask you to look at that. Then also the percentage of workforce housing, increasing that percentage, and I think you're probably going to do it anyway, but I'd like for the text amendment to include language increase in workforce housing. The AMI, I think, look again at that percentage. I'm not an expert on what the AMI should be, but let's take another look at that. And defining common amenity, I'm not as comfortable with the common amenity being included in the 10% open space. I think we need some clarification there.
Can I just clarify that we still have to meet, and I believe, Missy, I believe it's 40% minimum open space in this planning district? What's the minimum open space requirement?
It's 16% if it's, single family residential? Is that, do I remember that, Missy? So anyhow, those are my thoughts of issues.
I think the question, it's pervious to impervious, that ratio. That's what I'm, 60% pervious. So you've got 40% impervious is what I call open space. Of that, it's not in addition to that, but a portion of that, 10% of the whole site has to be active, usable open space. And I think we actually exceed that.
Okay, so maybe that's something to clarify. So sorry, Mr. Chair, I went on long, but it's a complex project, and I wanted to make sure that the development team, or the applicant, we'll say development team, that's the applicant and the staff heard the issues that I would set out.
Josh and team, well done. I think that you handled this site your purview. Missy, I just want to call out staff at this time. I'm very aware that staff has been pulled extensively to provide members of the public planning information, but I know staff has been dealing with this project for over 2 years. I understand that in some ways that has pulled you and staff off of other priorities. I'm at a point now where we have to make a decision. I think my opinions are well known. I've been around this block a number of times. I've seen mistakes made in this community in the past with LMO changes, upzoning issues that have got us into trouble. I'm not going to go into details, but I have serious reservations at this time. The community is vulnerable when it makes adjustments to the LMO. The LMO is a process where the community is involved over a period of time at a number of different public settings. I don't feel as though this proposal has met that same standard of scrutiny and adjusting measures of the LMO in a way that it's, in my opinion, going to be detrimental down the line. That's a judgment. I understand that. Other people have different opinions. I think there's an economic aspect of this that we as a council don't understand at this point. Only 15% are going to be dedicated workforce housing. The other economic 85% are based on the financial feasibility of the project. We don't know what those rents are. If the rents are high, then the bed count goes up. So I just think this is an extraordinarily complex proposition that we do not understand the downstream consequences. I'm in favor of housing, you all know that. I'm very enthusiastic about the potential campus developing further than where it is today. Those two aspects are very important to me. I think that conceptually speaking, workforce housing, housing for employees in this area makes sense. So there are a number of things that at a certain level, I agree with, strongly agree with, as a matter of fact. But we haven't gotten to the point where the community understands what this proposal means, nor has the community bought into it. And I think we're ahead of ourselves on making this commitment. I'm one opinion. So at this time, I would ask if there is a motion.
Yes, sir.
Oh, you want public opinion? Yeah, thank you. Are there any public comments at this time? And thank you. Yes, please.
Morning, Eric Somerville. And
Good afternoon, Eric.
What is it?
good review. Going to say a couple of things. One, I worked in Washington DC for 40 years. And during that time, if they didn't want to tell you something, they either didn't tell you or they told you so much you couldn't figure it out. And it felt very much like that. I give a lot of credit to Josh and his folks because he really did buy into all of what we're trying to do with an LMO. I appreciate all the effort. I would differ with you a little bit, David, relative to your assessment, only because it's a unique spot. It's a bit of in turmoil. It's been stuck that way for a long time. It isn't like it's an open field, sort of like Aqua Vera, when they violated something. So I kind of like what I heard this morning. I would want to approve it, not that I have any approval right. But I had some concerns. We make rules. One is clear cutting is not allowed. Then clear cutting happens. What's the penalty for the clear cutter? I'm not aware that there is any. It's clear cut, it's sort of too late and you go on. So Aqua, what was it? Terra, Aqua Terra. Whatever, but everybody knows what I'm trying to say. And the point is, it was built too close to the road. Did we not have a setback in the LMO? How did they get around that? Who does the approvals? Where does it stop? And what was the penalty? This looks like it was thought through very thoroughly. Yes, it's in a little crowded area. Yes, it's going to include more traffic. But the fact is, a lot more traffic will come over that bridge before too long. And my biggest fear is it'll just get backed up on the Cross Island Parkway because it's going to wait for getting around the speed that we've measured around Sea Pines is not as fast as the speed 3 lanes will take in and move all the way down to Sea Pines. So that traffic issue is going to be a big one way or the other. If this little area right now facilitates walking or bike riding well, maybe that's the way out. We have decent weather most of the year. So anyway, just a few thoughts on that.
Are there any other?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Julie Martin. I learned a lot today from presentations and everything, and I live in Sea Pines. And I think the word was blighted site. Is that what the word that was used? I would actually call it an eyesore. So, and one thing that I would like to share is we have two opportunities here, from what I understand. I know there's a lot that goes into these two opportunities, but the USCB campus, I remember walking in there a few years ago when it just opened, and what a beautiful site. And here's an opportunity to enhance an already beautiful educational site, in addition to taking away, and I would call it improving, a blighted or an eyesore site. And together it could form, workforce housing, student housing, a new area that people can really be proud of on the south end, whether they ride their bicycles in and out of or drive in and out of. It's just something that I think you all should consider strongly to really enhance that part of the island. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Related to the comment that the community has not learned enough about this, I think we have. This project's been going on for 2 years. I unpacked that article in January. So I think that if you speak to people and they are supporting this concept of private developer working with employers and taking the government out of the equation, I think people love that model. And I understand that there's concern about whether it's a 10-year term for, commitment to workforce housing, the 15% or not. The trouble is that in order for private market to work, the incentive has to be able to make some money. And the town has tried this with 30-year restrictions, with a lot of covenants, deep covenants. In the 90s and in the early 2000s, you have the family housing project in 1997, and then you have the median income housing program in 2006. And the town council essentially have to scrap all these programs because of the 30-year restrictions. And it not only does not benefit the community, also does not benefit the people that you intend to help, which are the employees. Because for housing ownership to exist, by capping the resale value of the house, the employees themselves cannot get mortgages. The banks would not allow them to do that because they won't be able to capture the equity, the benefits of that. And then for renters and for developers, restriction for 30 years, that's almost impossible for them to get bank loans. That's why you have to consider what our desires are and what's economically feasible. So to go back to those 2 points, I think that today the council members have already heard enough people from the community in support of this private investment. And I don't think it's because the community has not heard enough. Thank you.
David?
First off, thank you all. I want to make this point very clear. This has actually been going on 2.5 years. And you and I met 2.5 years ago. It was 2.5 years ago. And I think you would like the fact that we have spent time and money to go back and forth. And it's not a waste of time of taxpayers' money. We tried to get it to where you like. And I will tell you, David, you're not going to get 100% you want, and I'm not going to get 100%. It just life's not like that. It's give and take. And I think we put our best foot forward. And I'm not asking for 1 cent from the public, not 1 dime. And I'm a student housing developer. And I'm telling you, this university, it will die on a vine without housing. And I'm here to try to answer that. And it's not going to be perfect, but we're still willing to go back to staff and look some things. And maybe we can go back and there's one more, Miss Bryson, that we need to fix, like 4-bedroom units. But give us a chance to do that. I mean, this is a big deal. This is a $30 million project that I've spent 2.5 years on trying to get it right. And all I'm asking is give us the opportunity to get it done. Thank you.
Ray Deal. I obviously work at the Chamber of Commerce, but these comments are more from a personal perspective. I've been part of this community now for almost 20 years. Obviously part of the business community. I've lived in Hilton Head Plantation. I don't pretend to know all of the details and the zoning requirements, et cetera, but from a business perspective and from a resident's perspective, this thing makes sense. It absolutely makes sense. I think it would be a shame. And I think a lot of the problem that we've had as an island is developers won't touch us with a 10-foot pole because of so many hoops that they have to jump through. And I've seen that in my tenure here. And I think it would be a shame if we pass on this project. Thanks.
Thank you.
I just want to address the objection that the community doesn't understand and the community.
Sorry, can you state your name?
Matt Sweeney, 512 Colonial Drive. So about the objection that the community doesn't understand and the community has not bought into this project, I think there's a bit of irony in that statement. If we look at the housing fund that's been established for 2024 and it's $3.35 million, I would assert that that is not understood by the community. And in fact, it's not even understood by the town council. So 1 million of that has been earmarked for the North Point project, which is still a basically undefined project. And the other 2.35 has not been identified for any projects. Yet, so with a lack of understanding by town council, that's been approved. And I can assure you that there's no buy-in from the community for the use of that housing fund. So I believe the developer for this project knows the profit and loss for the project, and he's willing to take the full risk for it. So I ask you to please don't hold this up because you don't know the private P&L for the project, and don't hold it up because you don't have a district plan completed yet for this area.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kathleen Redmond. I live at 15 Hominy Place in Indigo Run. I'm a relatively new resident to town, and if you do not work with these people and pass this resolution, this opportunity is lost. It won't come back. We need it. The private employers on this island have all, it seems, come forward to say they want to support this. When I read that Surge Group said that they were in over a year ago, I thought this was a done deal. So what I don't understand is why you're hesitating. People have spoken in support. There's a lot of people not here because, by golly, I've been here for over 2.5 hours, and people have droned on about some things. You know what? We need to pass this. And I'm speaking for many other people who are unwilling to stand up and come out here. So that's my point of view.
If there are no other comments from the public, is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. There are a number of questions that have been raised here. Some of the questions have been answered. I don't think all of the questions have been answered. There's a great deal of benefit to this project, but I want the full council to have the opportunity to act on this project. And so it is my motion that we move this forward to the full council for consideration without a recommendation of approval or denial.
Second?
Second.
Any further comments from the dais? Any comments from the public?
Mr. Chair, just briefly, I'll support the motion. I think the staff asked us for suggestions as it moved forward, and I think I tried to go through my list with the development team and the staff, but just to repeat that list, looking at the last of the 3 of the staff recommendations, whatever you want to decide, just let us know. Secondly, some clarification of common amenity and that 10% open space or common amenity. Minor technical thing, but some further discussion about the workforce housing text. Not suggesting that it go the full boat, but some sort of maybe interim position be considered between what is proposed in the text and what the current LMO provides. So considering that, so that's another issue to consider. But otherwise, I'm voting on a text amendment. If I had to look at the plan, there's a lot I like about the plan, including the private funding, believe me, absolutely. But I'm voting on the text amendment today to enable a plan to move forward.
Thank you. Seeing no other comments from the dais or the public, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your right hand. Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. I believe we stand adjourned.
So much. The Christopher one sounds fun. Should I